Welcome to the new Haverlock Hunters intermission. The live stream will resume shortly. In the meantime, please enjoy this historical exploration of the Avani by Professor Raina Borgov, folktale included. It might surprise some humane to hear this, but the bird people might be the most diverse and historically significant species on the continent. Sure, we pigs have been the dominant species for a handful of centuries, but if you were to consider the entire history of the continent, then our species' ascendance is merely a footnote to a long history of scant survival. The fact is, many of our ancient ancestors did not live within powerful, sprawling kingdoms or a modern confederation of vassal cities. No, they lived in isolated settlements that dotted the landscape from Mulstrad all the way to Seasons Point. These towns were cramped and walled, built to keep our primitive forebears safe from the many threats that loomed from the wilderness: dogmen, vampire, fey things, and, in those days, the bird folk of the western plains. Those were the days of the Avani Union, which stretched back thousands of years before the assassination of the High King and the rise of New Haverlock. The Union was originally only crows, doves, and eagles, but diplomatic and military expansion spread the Union across the continent. Over time, the Union gained the membership of dozens of bird folk. From the owls of Novus to the faraway turkey vultures of Ulstrad. Even the storks, who now make war with the pigs of Granick, were once part of the Union. In operation, the Union was less of a governmental body and more of a vast and influential social club that promoted Avani interests. The basic motto of the Union was "May all bird folk prosper." Through this motto, the Union bent the continent into something more hospitable to their kind. They built public nests, where Avani could socialize, share resources, and explore the goals of Avani supremacy. They would spread seeds while gathering food, herd prey while hunting, and keep the predator population low. Perhaps most importantly, the hawks, eagles, and other birds of prey used their natural advantage in flight to keep the dogmen and primitive humane in check. If the reports of the Avani scholars are to be believed, the Avani Empire was an architecturally and technologically primitive society that was, in spite of this, a paradise. Frankly, when you look at how well the Avani tend to each other in our time, I'm apt to believe they lived up to their motto and theirs. The fall of the Avani Union was a slow thing, brought on by the dark age of the dogmen and the technological advances of the humane. 200 years ago, the Union was made up of 5 splintered nations: Corvidae Combine, Havoc Moot, Wagenid, the Sicanidae Stand, and Motrest, what the kingship called the erstwhile Empire. Now there are 3 nations left, with only the Corvidae Combine remaining strong. But the decline of the Union and the extinction of a few bird folk doesn't mean the decline of all Avani, does it? Of course not. Many Avani learned the most vital lesson of the modern age: assimilate or die. The rock doves were the first to abandon the Union for a better life amidst the other sapient species. Long before the rise of New Haverlock, they could be found in all sorts of cities, performing all sorts of jobs. At first, it was their ability to fly that made the rock doves invaluable as scouts, post officers, and high-altitude artisans. However, as the new era emerged, the rock doves found that their knack for numbers earned them prestigious careers as accountants, merchants, and engineers. Now the stereotype of birds being good with figures is so widely believed that even the most down-on-their-luck rock dove could find work in one of Brookside's many math houses. Not that math is the most glamorous work, of course, but it's a better rock bottom than most sapients have. While the rock dove is the most numerous Avani in New Haverlock, there are many other bird folk who either live or do business in the city. Crows, gulls, and hawks are a relatively common sight. Even eagles and turkey vultures aren't unheard of. However, there is a standing order to shoot storks on sight. And here is a translated and abridged folk tale, titled, The Founding of the Union. There were 3 Avani, a dove, an eagle, and a crow, traveling across the western plains. The 3 were strangers, wandering together by pure coincidence, for in those days there was no union. The 3 walked in silence for days, each wary of the other, but then, one night, they came under attack. Dogmen howled in the distance, and each of the 3 only had a moment to decide what to do. The dove drew a sickle, for he could not fly away. He carried a heavy basket of treasures for his family. The eagle drew a spear, for she would not fly away. To flee, even in the face of death, would dishonor her. The crow, on the other hand, had neither treasure nor honor to lose, and yet, she drew her hammer and chisel. The dove and eagle looked at the crow and said, "You are crow folk, clever and selfish. Why do you draw a weapon when you could fly away?" The crow replied, "I am crow folk, clever and selfish. I do not flee because I want to taste something cleverer and more selfish by far." The dove and eagle had no time for further questions. The dogmen were on them. Numerous and rabid as they were, the dogmen couldn't defeat the bird folk's union of scythe, spear, and hammer. They were driven back, yelping. The dove and eagle, exhausted but glad for their victory, turned back to the crow. The crow who had stayed. The crow who turned the tide of battle. The crow who had a crude axe buried in her back. Her breathing was slow, but she had a clever, selfish twinkle in her eye. "Thank you," said the dove, "please, let me bury you with my treasure." "Thank you," said the eagle, "please, let me bury you with my honor." But the crow shook her head. "I do not need your treasure or your honor, for I got to taste something better by far, union between bird folk." The crow closed her eyes, and with one last breath said, "What could be cleverer or more selfish than that?" The end. Thank you for your patience and attention. The live stream or another informational intermission video will begin shortly.